Good afternoon, or good morning, or evening. I understand we have a lot of participants from literally around for this webinar. I'm Dale Medeiros. I'm an environmental planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Thanks for attending today's webinar, Livable Public Play Spaces that Integrate Natural Systems. This is the second webinar that is part of a series that NVRC is organizing over the next year to share resiliency innovations from abroad and their practical applications to Northern Virginia. It is the special part of NVRC's international work to find and apply lessons from overseas that benefit Northern Virginia environmentally, economically, and socially. We have the very, very special privilege today of welcoming Herbert Dreiseidel, a sculptor, artist, landscape architect, and urban visionary who has worked for decades around the globe to make urban spaces greener, healthier, and more livable. Based in Überlingen, Germany, Herbert specializes in bringing together the world of the aesthetic, nature, health, and urban hydrology. Herbert is also no stranger to Northern Virginia. He spent a substantial portion of his time here and worked on a range of projects, such as the 4 Mile Run Watershed Restoration Plan, and served as a consultant to the U.S. National Park Service. Some further context for today's webinar. Climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic have placed enormous pressure on public spaces, especially parks. The rise of environmental and health issues drives us all outdoors in search of peace of mind, relaxation, socialization with our families, friends, and neighbors, as well as for fun, but also relief from all of the environmental stresses that we are now confronting. As the demands on our parks and public spaces accelerates, planners across the region and around the world will need to constantly rethink about spaces that bring together serenity, accessibility, environmental protection, and culture. Over the course of Herbert's presentation, we invite you to observe and consider ways that his work can inspire and perhaps find applications in our own region. The format for today's webinar is simple. Herbert will speak and share images of his projects for approximately 35 minutes. Then we will invite questions from all of you. If you wish to ask Herbert anything, please park your question into the chat box for Corey Miles to read and to relay to Herbert. The webinar is scheduled to run until approximately 1:15 p.m. Then Herbert has another commitment. Thank you so much, Herbert. The camera is all yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dale Medeiros and Corey Mills for the organization and getting everything ready for this webinar. And I'm very proud to speak to you about livable public places in integrated natural systems. Northern Virginia region is a wonderful area, and I remember on all my journeys I had to this region, how wonderful, especially this part of the year, you have the landscape besides wonderful towns and cities, rivers, streams, forests. I would like to share with you a little bit my philosophy before I start with projects. I think projects are always the outcome how people think, how people actually have fantasy, have imagination for places, because everything what we do is basically first in our head and then it gets into reality. So the art to think in the right direction or to be more flexible is extremely important. I'm very much teaching in different universities, and I'm working also with kids and with different generations. I'm trying to get public involvement, and I'm also sometimes working with very, very difficult people. And it's so important that we get a common sense about how our future could look like for our generation, but also for future generations. For me, it's very important that we start already with children because they ask wonderful questions. And sometimes the questions are so cute, but also so intelligent that sometimes we don't have answers. But it's very important actually to give kids the opportunity to get and find answers in the way how they play, in the way how they experience the environment, in the way how they interact with each other. That's a very, very important part for our basic needs we have in our society so that our democracy can also function. Fluid thinking has to do with many, many regions of the world, many, many different scales. It is connected to art, to policy making, to decisions, to urban planning. It is also about how we create our environment so that we are ready for the future, so that water and green and climate can actually give conditions where our grandchildren can still survive in a world which is somehow livable. Well, I'm very happy that I'm living on a wonderful place here between Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. I live on the Lake of Constance, which was a very polluted lake not long ago. I mean, like 50 to 70 years, we had a lot of fertilizers from agriculture, and we started to clean it up. And this is where I live. But I'm also working very, very close with experiments, hands-on experiments, looking at what you can do with streams. And I would like to share at the beginning very much about, before we get into project, what is the driver? What is actually making our project interesting? And what is actually the starting point to have good ideas? Well, big projects around the world, which I was involved with several teams on places like Pforzheim in Berlin, in the center, or in China or in America, all basically need a very, very important first starting moment. Starting moments you can find sometimes in your playing, even as adults, if you go for holiday somewhere in the mountains here in Switzerland to look at this wonderful flow of water in streams. And I think it is so fascinating to see that nature first can teach us everything we are longing for in our city. Change process, balance, resiliency, regeneration, regenerative forces, adaptation, climate resiliency, and so on. It's very, very interesting how nature actually always behaves in a way of interaction, of balancing extremes, and of course, erosion, sedimentation is always a long process, but it's very, very important for change processes. It's I think, very important to get a basic understanding about what processes of evolution are and how creative the world is where we are in. And our consciousness might be just like a little fly of a second if we look in the change process of evolution. It is most impressive to be, for example, in the Sahara of Africa, in a desert, and to experience that flow and movement is everywhere, even on these sand dunes, which are permanently in a change process. But also every little animal, even there, depends on water, depends on the environment, and is so much fragile like we are. We often forget about this, but it's so important. And when we look what contains us, agriculture, land, soil conditions, it is fragile. And what is probably the first landscape architect who creates this kind of wonderful surface on Earth? Well, I like very often little experiments. I will just show you one here, and I have to take the sound. I have to take the sound off. This is a little experiment I often do with my students to basically understand how is the flow of a river, because we can see lots of things happening, even in a little stream. This is just a plate, and we let water run down here, and we see the change of the river system is permanently in a movement and in a flow. So that's really fascinating to just see such things. I will just go to the next one. I often do little drawings, and I do drawings with adults. I do drawings with kids, finding water forms and finding out how actually landscape works. Sometimes even, and I think that's for creativity extremely important, is that we look at structures and we try to bring structures into our body movement. You will just see now something where we try to create a kind of wave rolling in, finding out, what is happening on this turning point between air and water. How can we get this movement so inwardly that we are good in design? And I often do this with different forms, historic forms, modern forms, and it's always our imagination which creates this kind of good design solutions. Well, I do this often also with my teams, and I go to another one looking at a vortex structure. It is really fascinating. if I'm just looking through here, how the robotics is creating a um, kind of inner structure where you find, first when you look in, you see almost nothing. If you put some particles in, you can see that it is speeding up. And if we started with students now to put some color in, we see how beautiful structured such a vortex, for example, is. And this is, of course, a very important part of also my first design project. I mean, just vortex structures, for example, on a playground. Modeling with clay or making a vortex street is another example of how to bring awareness of for students and for people to how water actually links different sides, two extremes, and how that is brought together. These are very common experiments you can always do when you use water and when you use, for example, here something like glycerine and podium powder on top, and then we can see that there is always an exchange from right to left, from two sides, and actually the contrast of two elements, of two opinions, even in discussions, creates creativity. And if we would learn also in our politics that we use different sides as something which can inspire something third, we would learn so much better. So maybe I leave just some of these structures and go right away into some other modeling thing here, and then before we go into our projects. Here actually I like to show this one, which is quite nice. This is how we do a river system with modeling with our students here, and they start to do that in a very interesting way. And let the water go here, and then they see, wow, what is happening? Where is salmon going up, or steelhead standing? What are the fishes do when they go upstream? You can learn a lot about this kind of thing. So maybe I just leave that here. Always my working teams and design teams have had to go through such exercises before you come up. And well, that is now important now for our webinar session. To play is not only on playground equipment and plastic. Actually, to play, the most incredible learning moments are sometimes the unexpected areas. It can be a little sand dune or little muddy paddle, and to see, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone has to do that, but you see how much joy, for example, these little children here in Asia have to experience water. Well, lots of artists, engineers, technicians have used that. Leonardo is an extremely interesting example about bringing philosophy, art, engineering, technology, and architecture together. And of course, we find this kind of structures and inspiration of forms and shapes everywhere in the world. My very first work on working with art and bringing experience moments to people was working with structures, with open structures in different forms. This one is actually the municipal center in Ann Arbor, where you have at night glass pearls which shine, and the water is just very little water, rainwater basically, is flowing over this form. Or this one is in stone, in natural stone, in near Frankfurt, near the airport, a plaza called Pforzheim, where the water is actually flowing and going through, and everyone can go there, can sit beside, can listen to the water. Or this one here on the Lake of Constance nearby, where the different levels of water can go up and down, and this sculpture is basically circulating water from the ocean. Water can also, or the environmental impact on water is at night interesting. The sound, the reflection. This one is a project where the sound of the city is taken by microphones and brought to loudspeakers, and the vibration is brought to the little structures, and they create wonderful light patterns on the different buildings. So it's an interactive piece of art. Now, coming to more the question, how can we bring art and water structures into the question about our great cities? How can we actually bring livability into the cities? I will share some examples. I was very happy to work for the city of Singapore in the last couple of years. This one is actually a project where we started to come up with pilot projects. I was actually with our team developing, at that time it was Atelier Dreiseidel still. We were developing something for the entire city together with other engineering companies and a number of other teams. We call it the ABC Water Guidelines, active, beautiful, and clean structures for the city of Singapore. Some of the pilot projects actually brought water, surface water, rainwater runoff to the surface. And instead of having a monsoon rain, which is shooting the water out into the ocean, we try to slow it down, open it up, make it wider, and make it so that under normal conditions, when there's no rain, the water can be low. And when we have extreme water floods and water storms, water can be stored in the park by just creating a monsoon rain flood area, like a valley which could be flooded. We know this is always a big debate about security, about can this happen. I'm convinced that in the future we need to make our cities resilient and regenerative in a way that they can handle extremes of climate change. And that means also that we need to give space back to the city and space back to the water especially. And we can combine engineering and stormwater management with park design and with public areas. Look, this was on the left-hand, on the right-hand side, you see how this stream looked like, a monsoon drain and concrete, 2 fences on both sides. And some years later, we opened it up. We opened it 2013. And since then, it's a wonderful model, which is actually copied in many other Asian cities and actually spreading around the world as an idea. But there's no rain. People can go down and they can find all kinds of animals. We have fish otters, we have dragonflies. The biodiversity and the eco-habitat did increase enormously. There's a very interesting side. And look at the buildings, they are still the old buildings. But for people who live actually there, even the real estate value was going up extremely. So people like to enjoy, go out, go over steps. And when there's rain, there is a lot of water here and you cannot actually cross over. People are not stupid. So when it's raining and the water comes up, then people are getting out. We often make our security things so that children have no chance anymore to experience also to experience, for example, the environment in a way that we learn how to behave in the right way with risks. We cannot get rid of risks. Risks are everywhere, but we have to learn how to handle it, and that's also in cities important. And besides that we are so much afraid about getting children exposed to the environment, we lose a lot of educational aspects. I think it is important, for example, for these kids who usually only know a frog and a dragonfly from television, from TV, to really go out in a park with their parents and to see, how beautiful a dragonfly can look like. If you design it in the right way, it is a joy, it's happiness here for millions of people who enjoy it. Now, I think Dale was also asking me, I should talk a little bit about playgrounds and playground equipment. I'm very much aware that very often in the Western world, we are creating playgrounds with a fence around, we separate it and so on. I'm trying to open and to integrate it into parks. And I try to integrate it in a way that play can actually happen everywhere. Of course, it needs a very good management of get rid of cars in certain areas so that kids can really play. And this playfulness of colors, of water streams, of balancing over hills is here in this park a very, very important part. This was actually also done more and more now, spreading out. It made a revolution in Singapore now for totally different kinds of playground equipment, which are going much more to natural design things. And actually, I really like to present you this one unplanned thing. This little boy, I was actually watching him for about almost 15 minutes. And this is actually one of the flow form structures I implemented in this park. And it was so interesting how this little boy was actually laying in with his body, and he was waiting until the water was actually backing up. And then he was standing up and seeing how the water was going down. Then he was laying back again, holding the water back. In an interesting way, he learned probably in his 15 minutes more than all my students in all one semester about retention and detention. And he really got it with his body. So playing can actually often happen in very, very interesting ways. Well, we have destroyed our environment with industry, with transforming forms and landscapes. And I would just like to let you know that also, not only in the US, but also in Europe or in Asia and other parts of the world, we have that huge change process of landscapes. I'm actually working now with our small team here on a project called Pforzheim brownfield industrial landscape to reshape the entire area here for the future, so that after mining, it can be actually an integrated landscape which will fulfill much more the topics I just mentioned. Because it's a very, very hard way how to bring really good ideas into this. But this is actually really the action fields where we have to do much more in the future. Now, a nice example here from Portland, Oregon, Hello Springs Park, a project I was working with Mike Abate with Greenscapes and with a part of a team who was very, very inspired about transforming a brownfield area which was very much industrial, and we recycled actually a lot of the material, like the steel structures of tracks, what you see on the left hand side, and we created a kind of lost wetland. We brought it back into the city. I remember when after opening the project, it was criticized as boutique ecology, which should be somewhere, but not in the city. I think now it's really a very good model for how to bring actually orchards, dragonflies, frogs back into the city, and it's still a modern urban park. A modern urban park with a lot of different things happening. The process also for such a project was very much involving the public and in getting people on board. So you see on one of the slides here, actually a kind of studio for the local inhabitants of Portland, of the region. We had about almost 300 people joining a long weekend where we did start work with art, with exercises, with looking at water structures. We had little groups who were starting to come up with design ideas. And the ideas from people, basically from the local people in Portland, were so inspiring for me and for my team that for Untitled Chapter and Greenworks at that time, that we actually took that up and brought it into a new language for design. And people were very, very excited about this process. And I think that was a project where I can say, well, here it did work well, how to involve the engagement of people. And it is really both. It is a stormwater treatment park. It is a cleansing biotope. It is a kind of heritage reminder or memory park, because it brings the old train tracks, which are 100 years old, back. We have the lost species of dragonflies, and in here in this inlays of glass from Portland bullseye glass. And we see that people are getting down, photo shooting for couples when they married. It's a very vibrant park, which is to every time very, very interesting. You see your kids sitting, sometimes performance of art. It's a park which really brings people and the environment together, and still brings playing and playground equipment all together in one. And I think that's a very important part of the story I would like to bring over in this webinar. Well, of course, technology and engineering is an enormous important part. It has to be integrated. In a lot of projects I did work on for the last 35 years, I was always trying to do more than just nice design or nice art, but just really to integrate questions we have: how to treat stormwater, how to filter it, how to clean it, and how to bring it clean either in the underground or into our streams and rivers, so that our fish and our our aquatic life in the submarine, in the marina bays and so on, don't suffer from all the pollution we put in. And we have to do our homework really in front of our doorstep in cities, and we can do it. If we would be more innovative, we could do a lot of better things than we do today. Well, this park was an experimental park, and of course we did try out new things, and I'm very happy with this experience. I'm also very happy about my wonderful partners I had in Portland, and I'm also absolutely happy how strong the municipality in Portland was supporting this project and supporting all the different ways of planning. Now, at the end, I will just show some early projects about integration of playing and playgrounds. This one is a water well and a water supply station for a city in South Germany called Pforzheim. Sorry, but here it is, so that this playground, everything to let water flow, kids have to lift the water. They have Archimedean screws, they have the shadow to get water up, and they have to work together as a group. So the whole playground only works if you have an activity where everyone is in partnership and is sharing responsibility for this playground, for the water. It's a wonderful playground. It's actually more than 15 years old, still working very well. People love it, and that's one which I think is a very interesting example. I even have here pictures of kids who are now mothers and have kids again. Sometimes when they see it, they smile because they say, our kids are also now using this playground. Well, that's just some examples. Of course, all that needs maintenance. You have to maintain the things so it keeps. Sometimes you have to exchange things and get new ones back if something breaks down. To my two last examples, I'd like to share one company or one friend of mine, Bernard Tanel, who is creating playgrounds, also very, very much in relationship to the site, to the area, and using also natural material. It was probably one of the very early people and companies who started to work with real wooden material, wooden structures. These are very popular places, like a bird's nest where you can go in, where you can climb over, where you have colors, where you bring in fantasy, where you have sandy structures below. And it is integrated into a park. It's actually in our city where I live here, on the beach. There is even a spider net where you can walk over, natural material used here. A very, very beautiful way how to engage all generations in a place. Or here, a little place to walk over, big areas to make swings in the forest. And this is a trend which I think is worldwide coming up. And even if I take an extreme example, a city which is very, very much on technology and has a lot of industry like Singapore, Singaporeans love it to go into their wild forest and to create more natural playground areas. And to play is actually not just for kids important, it's also for us, even for in my generation. I'm 65. it is very important that I still can be like a child, to have love to the environment and to experience something completely new with my body, with my maybe limited abilities. But it is so important that we interact with each other and with the environment in a very, very interesting and joyful way. Well, this is also on a more modern plaza in Ulm, the town where I was born. We had to work actually on a plaza which is close to very much loud and noisy traffic road, and also a train station behind here. And we tried to filter the sound of the city by this kind of membranes. And when the water is coming through and going over this membranes, it is interesting actually that it doesn't matter anymore if there are cars going by, because this sound of water filters actually the sound of the wheels of cars in a very interesting way, so that it doesn't matter anymore. So even if it is a little bit noisy, this kind of water is calming down the atmosphere of this place. So I'm very much believing that in the way, if we design in the right way, we are bringing health and therapy also to our behavior, to the way how people behave, to the way how people interact. I think Dale knows this well. I was, in the very early time, I was working with kids and young people who had really problems to get into our society, to get into work, who were drug addicts with morphine and heroin. How to get these kids actually out of from the street and actually get them to be motivated and to have trust, and also to get away from all their fear what they have. This is, I think, to play and to find ways how to interact and to build trust is an enormous, important part, which has to be, of course, a lot to do with the way how we behave with this kind of generation, but also the way how we designed our cities, so that people feel welcome, that people feel at home and not as foreigners. Well, these are just kids from Turkey joining with old German kids. You know, the different ethnic groups, and I know you have in the U.S. this big problem of different groups of fighting against each other, white and black and so on. I mean, it is so important that actually joining and meeting and trustful experiences, this is happening in the public realm, and is often happening by children when they grow up on playgrounds. That's why I'm believing that it is extremely important to make that open spaces and public spaces in a playful way, that we learn how to interact and also to be tolerant to different ways of playing, different ways of opinions, different ways of lifestyle. I think that is the only chance we have for the future generations, where our cities are getting more and more populated and more dense, and resources are getting shorter and shorter, that we can actually survive in a good way. Well, climbing, playing, maybe a PlayStation here, which is just for soccer, for table soccer, chess, for this. There are many different ways how to do that in an interesting and creative way. You can also bring school classes, and this is, by the way, just a stormwater runoff collection and filtration on the plaza. I go to a last project. I think that I will have my 35 minutes just right. This is actually a new city called Solar City in Austria, in Linz, where it is also an interesting way how to integrate river systems, landscape, climate questions, energy questions, traffic problems, and to combine the different topics of what people need for lifestyle, what children need, what elderly people need, and what is good for the environment, and how to combine that. We did try to work on this project in many different ways. All the water you see here is basically collected rainwater and groundwater. Kids love it. We have play stations and play areas everywhere around, and from the city they can actually hold back, store, integrate this. They have even a swimming area here. It is a wonderful way to live in such a city where you create the environment close by, and it is all man-made. It is not really nature in a way. It is like a man-made urban nature, which is very, very, very much beloved by kids. And with this last slide, I actually have, of course, much more examples, but I would actually finish with that and just summarize on the title that it is important if we have this playfulness, and that if we create experiences for every generation, for every ethnic group, for every kind of the society, to open the public realm in an interesting way that we more integrate instead of separate, in a way that we integrate different realms and places and maybe also sometimes objects of playfulness, which don't need a fence, which don't need to be separated. And also to bring actually the environment and environmental topic, which are important for climate and climate change, also together. And let me say last words, we are living in a situation, in a time of the pandemic situation with COVID-19. Especially there, of course, where distance is important, but where sunlight, fresh air, health, and also a little bit something like, besides being always inside, of fun and trust to the environment, is especially for young people so important. That's why we need to be, and this pandemic situation is something we might need to work in the future, much more sensitive for that question. I don't think it is over so quickly, so we might have other problems again where we have to be very much aware about it. So we have to design and to create our environment so that we can actually handle these challenges. The environmental challenge of climate change, but also the challenge about our society and the challenge of health issues. And by that, I think I'll leave it. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm very curious and very interested about your questions. And I hope I can get it all and give you some answers or give you some ideas, maybe also to discuss further on these questions. Thank you so much. Now it's up to you, Dale and Corey.
Okay, thank you so much, Herbert. This is Corey Miles from the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. I will be reading the questions to Herbert. We have several here. The first one is, how is the impact of climate change being factored into the design of these parks, considering the duration, intensity, and frequency of storms seems to be increasing? So does that place a lot of pressure on these parks to function as more of a stormwater feature?
Yeah, what we usually do on what I always try to, but many companies and firms are now already aware about this. We try to design just the stormwater retention quantity, what we need. We always go to a 100-year storm event for emergency cases. I'll give you one example. The city of Copenhagen, we did create the cloudburst project, which is basically an idea to handle the extreme cloudburst situations. And we are starting to plan that streets and also parks periodically can be flooded if there's a lot of rain, because when it pours rain, then of course no one is using the parks, so that we can hold back and handle certain quantities. I think today every city and every municipality and every designer has to be aware that the data we have today are already somehow old-fashioned, that they are changing rapidly. We will have much stronger storms and suddenly flash rains, which can be extremely strong in one part. And we will also have the other extreme, more and more, that we have long periods with extremely dry and hot weather situations. So to tackle climate situations, climate stress. In all the projects I'm doing now, I'm trying to bring in more green, more evaporation, more trees to buffer heat island effects, green roofs, vertical green, and this could be a whole lecture for itself. I mean, there are many examples. Greening our cities means we make our cities more resilient and more ready for the climate extreme. There are different names to that. For example, the swamp city is a term we use a lot in China. All around the world, we have to design our cities to be ready for the extremes. We will have more and more. We have them already now. We can see them, but it will happen much more for the next generations. And what we do now, if we do our homework now, we will be prepared for all that extremes we will have to fight with.
Okay, moving on to the next question. How willing are the authorities in the cities to integrate stormwater treatment with public play spaces in your experience? In Germany, many of these treatment devices need to be fenced off, for example, and therefore not even meet the minimum requirement for interaction with water accessibility.
Yeah,
and
that's
then,
good. That's a very, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and then how did you overcome health and safety concerns?
Yeah, I mean, this is the day-to-day job we have to do in our in discussions, and I think the this question about how to open it and how to actually let people have access more closely to green and to blue-green infrastructures, there's a lot of details and a lot of serious planning what we need to do. First one, I just mentioned some. I mean, it's very, very complex. It would just totally break this session. One is that we always need to avoid danger which we cannot see. For example, never have deep water on the edge. So it's always shallow. We call it like a berm, like in Berlin, Pforzheim, there's no fence around. We have rainwater which goes in here, and when you fall in water or step in, there's always a very shallow and flat area before it slowly then gets deeper, so that easily people can actually go out. Some areas which might be a height drop, we need, of course, also to make a wall or a fence. Then a very important part is water quality. If we treat water and stormwater, or if we combine it with groundwater, we have to know about the limnology and the water chemistry. If we have a lot of fertilizers in water, we can forget it. So we need to work to get the water clean, to purify the water, and we need integrated systems. I call them cleansing systems or cleansing biotopes, where nutrients and phosphorus is filtrated out and is brought into plants and vegetation so that the water is actually clear. In a lot of the projects I have done, we have crystal clear water, and they are very, very well accepted. I know it's difficult to do, and it cannot be done everywhere. Open water needs a certain scale. If it's too small, it cannot work. It's tricky. Then you have to get it more artificial. Then you have to filter it and a lot. But if you have a bigger water body like here, and we have the substrate where the water is filtered through, then we can actually do it. So it's very much a matter of design. The security and the safety issues is always something which we have to handle with long discussions. The second part of the question was how municipalities actually work with it. It's a long discussion for every project, and I know it's an ongoing thing because but also my project always had a very, very intense discussion about water safety, where is the danger, how can we avoid it, and well, I give you just one example at the end. The very extreme example in Singapore, the Mokyo Park with the Kallang River Canal was designed basically, before we started our work, by generations before, 2 fences on both sides, concrete, no one was allowed to go in. But what actually happened, kids were in evening going down and playing soccer, because it was a wonderful way to have that concrete slab where you can just make soccer plays and so on. And then when it started to rain, it was so slippery and so subtle, the water came down, that they were almost like in a prison. They could not escape, and every year boys died in these canals. Since we opened it, made it wider, made it more without fences, made it very, very wide so that the water actually, when it gets up, is spreading and people can easily go out, can see where the danger is. We have no accident, and it really works well. So the way how to handle risks and danger is something we are still having a long journey to go. But I think we have to get away from this kind of just making fences and hiding everything. That's not the solution, because then our next generation will also have no awareness anymore what the environment is also in our cities. That's what I'm very much convinced, and I think there needs more research on this field.
Okay. Next question. Building on your experience, what is your advice to local governments involving the local community in the design of parks?
Yeah. My advice is to be more creative, to use the creative intelligence of humans, of local people. The problem is often in communication with and in public involvement, that we are too intellectual, too much abstract. So what we do often in workshops, and this is of course very common, that we give informations, we give maybe information desks or boards where people have to go through, then they get a kind of stamp or picker where they make little marks. I like this, I don't like that. Then they get maybe 3 alternatives. Then they can give pickers. I like this one. I don't like this one. I like this one most. That is actually very difficult, because you know what you usually then get in public involvement, you get always old habits where people are actually always come with what we are used to. We want to have that again, because humans are, the nature of humans is always so that we don't like to give up our habits. We are always sort of know that what we have done always did work, or we think it did work, and so we don't want to change. Really good workshops for public participation should be different. And my wife and I, we are often doing workshops in a very different way. We try to get actually also different types of people into workshops. What I see very often in public involvement groups is that we only get old people, always like me, 60 plus, and they always come with very specific opinions, and they try to defend their opinion. And it's like in politics, you know, they have a special interest group, and they're fighting their interests, and there's another interest group, they are fighting their interests. So when you start as a planner, you're just between, as we see in Germany, you're sitting between two rocky chairs, and you have just to maneuver this crisis and chaotic situation about groups fighting against each other. Well, I think that's a very old way and of involvement and participation, which I think is not very future oriented. I think what is better and what really works good, and I did test it out several times, is that we start first in the way that we totally mix the groups. So maybe we give people little tasks or little things where they are surprised about coming into a workshop, where they see suddenly maybe art, maybe a kindergarten group, maybe a breakdancer group on the stage, and they do something about their city, and there are artists maybe on stage who are showing a totally different perspective on the city, opening up the mind of everyone to totally new questions. You can also do this with art exercises where you are not too much always logically thinking about finding everyone has answers already before you ask a question. So it's important first to open people's minds on new ways of looking at things and coming up with totally new questions. Then I think my advice would also be to work in groups where people think not about tomorrow, but about 20 years from now. How would I like to see my city if I go with my grandchild through the city? What would I like to see on a Saturday afternoon at a specific time? Describe your city, what you would love to see. Then suddenly you see there is a totally different way of visionary, of creating something where you come out with a totally different kind of idea what the future might look like. And then we often make, what I also like is I let people create their vision themselves. And of course, as planner, you cannot just take what people have been drawing and then bring it right to the computer or drawing board. You have to transform, because people usually are giving a kind of dream for the future. And I think it's important to get this genius loci, what people have in mind, and to filter it out and to bring it, what is the basic underlining message, what people actually are dreaming of. And if you create that in a workshop, then you have the basis to bring up good design. I think municipalities who can bring a workshop or a process like that and creating something with good people and good planners, they will be able to capture these dreams and bring it into a real design solution. I had very often the experience that people were absolutely fascinated and happy and said, yes, wow, we are fighting for that. And then you have the support of the public for sometimes amazing, interesting projects. This one, which you see on screen, was actually by that. Portland had at that time a really big crisis. I mean, America was at that moment, we had all a depression on finance sector, so a lot of projects were just cut off. When it came to the city parliament to decide about the project, the hall was actually half full of people, and they were saying, we want to have that project. And that's why this project was not killed and was not cut down. That is what public involvement actually can be. So I think new ways, new methods, more creativity, more the common sense of future, falling in love with future and creating this moments of being positive about the future and not criticizing always what is maybe coming up. That's, I think, the key point to make good public involvement. So sorry, I was talking a bit long, but it's a topic I'm totally fascinated because I think it is so little still done in this way, and again, it needs a lot of research how to make such workshops more creative and to get really people more excited about their own city and take ownership.
Wow, thank you. So moving to the next question, somebody asked, in some of the project, I saw small trees. In others, it felt as if mature trees may have been removed to provide for water flow. Don't we need more trees in urban areas to reduce heat? And how do we reconcile tree preservation with importance of open spaces?
Yeah, that's an important point. It's also an important point to me. By the way, I keep that picture because these trees are much bigger now. We use actually these trees are all they're new trees. We call them in. They are much bigger, larger trees. We try to keep trees as much as we can. When we create new cities or new areas or plazas, of course, I often had an empty place and I had to bring trees in. But sometimes, and this is also a point where I'm always very honest, we also have to replant trees or take them away and bring new trees. Now, I have one example, which was for me as a young planner, a real strong learning curve. in the city of Stuttgart, we had the Bismarckstraße, an alley with old trees, and people were fighting to keep the trees, and people were with chains on trees so that they were not cut down. So actually, a planner, I was not actually doing the plans, but I was involved in a way I could see what it was happening. People were keeping these old trees and fighting for them, where the planners had actually ideas to replace them, to bring new trees. Actually, 4 to 5 years later, all these trees, some of the very big trees, died because their conditions of soil, some of the trees were already very, very strong, hurt by cars and so on. So these trees really were not surviving, and because they didn't put early enough young trees who could develop and grow, they had a very long time almost no trees and not really good trees. So to balance this, old trees and new trees, and how to bring new trees in cities, and also it's not only trees, it's also vertical green roofs. We can do so much more, but it's sometimes we have to be very flexible with that and find ways how to bring it in. That's what I can say on that point. Fight for it, but don't be fanatic.
Okay, are mosquitoes a problem in these water features?
Fun?
Mosquitoes.
Oh, wow. This is a question which always comes. In my project, I don't have mosquitoes. The point is, mosquitoes like to breathe in stagnant water without movement and without any enemies. So like the typical mosquito breeding is in a still standing area where you have wetlands with water paddles or a water barrel. You will see all the little larvae in this barrel after a certain time. What I try to do in a lot of these projects, also the large projects like in Singapore, where the mosquito is a serious problem, can be a serious problem. We have fish, we have frogs, we have animals which are happy if they get mosquitoes because they love them for their food, so they control it. So to balance nature in a way that you have not the danger that you suddenly have an extreme mosquito breeding, that is something you can plan. You can actually create it. And I know it is a big issue. There are also certain plants and certain ways how deep you make the water, which is there important. But you can avoid this. And in my project, I never had mosquito problems.
Okay. Have you ever, I'm sorry. How have you dealt with the issues of health departments wanting constant testing on any water features that involve public use?
Say it again. I couldn't hear it clear enough.
Okay, so the question is, how do you deal with health departments that want to test the water features?
Health departments. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, we have that also in Germany and other countries. Scandinavia, we have very high standards for water quality. What we usually have to look at and regulations is open water is never directly drinking water. It is called like baths. In Germany, we have different ways of classification. For example, here, what you see here, the water has to be clean enough so that it is not polluted in a way that if someone starts to get a little bit of water out of it and drinks it, it would not harm the person. So it has to be no chemistry, heavy metals, things in. So it needs to be in relatively good standards. But it can be bath or lake water. It is not drinking water per se. Everywhere where you have a water feature where people get hands-on or get close to water and are invited to drink, then therefore you have to use either drinking water, or you have to filter the water by filtration, reverse osmosis, by bringing ozone to it, or even putting chlorine in, which I try to avoid as much as I can. So it depends really how the water is designed, how the water feature looks like. I work a lot with health organizations on that question, and it's very important for planners very early on to have a conversation to find out, what are the requirements. And actually, it is often very important that in such organizations, people are also often open. If you start to discuss early on and say, this is actually what we are doing. Here are some references or examples, maybe from other planners where it did work. We would like to do something similar. These are our filtration technologies. This is the way how we make sure that the water is clean. Can you support that? Or do you have any special requirements? And then you start to negotiate and discuss very early on. That's the way which comes to the best results. It might be also from city to city also very different, but I think talking to people, finding out, and also it's often so that a health organization, a health department in a city, of course, is under very strong pressure. So you have to work out solutions where they actually can say, yes, we don't have a risk, or the risk is so minimal that we can actually say yes, and we can handle it. But it's an ongoing discussion.
Yes, I could see that. Okay, so the next question, how difficult is it to portray the economic benefits of green park design?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that is something which a lot of organizations, also in Europe, are starting to do research on that, or creating tools about bringing value to ecosystem services and seeing what green parks can create. I think we are still very early on that. I mean, there are lots of benefits, which are the often not the direct ones, but the indirect benefits, which we often have difficulties how to measure them and how they bring them into dollars and into value. I know in the US it's of course very often that creating money is even sometimes more important than creating a nice environment. So that's maybe a little different sometimes in European cities, but we have basically also the challenge how to get investment and how to bring a city to invest into such structures. I think what some examples I know from cities like in Singapore, we did that, or in Copenhagen, and also in Germany in several cities, we started to measure what is the psychological effect. We did this also at our university. What is the impact on psychological side? For example, if you have a gray environment without green, without trees, without a landscape like here, people are more aggressive, people have more depressions, and people have more burnout. To go out in a green area is much more motivating than if you are in a gray area. To walk and to go out in fresh air can avoid a lot of medicine which our society more and more is taking to overcome depressions. So the psychological effect on healthy parks, healthy environments, I think is extremely important, and the social behavior and the behavior of people in such areas, there is less vandalism, less aggressivity, less crime. I think that can be proven, but still our research is very much on on the beginning on that. I think another one which is probably more easy. I think just this project has very nice figures. Developers and investors know that if they have their property in front of such a park, their property value is really going up. And I think the one example I have shown in Singapore was actually an extreme example. In this one here, we have new buildings which came up here between, and actually you cannot see them on this side. I think it is probably here. There's some here or some over here. On that one, there came some new buildings up here. The property value of these buildings in front here was extremely high because of the park renovation. People who are living here in the first or second or third row didn't want to leave anymore. They had so much. They didn't like this area that the exchange rate of flats, of people moving out and in and out, was much lower than in other parts. So I think real estate development or values is very strong influenced by that, and especially young people, young families are more and more aware about this, that green environment in front of your doorstep for the family, for kids, is extremely important. Yeah, and I think there are many other parts. I mean, another one to measure is, of course, that's what also we do in different organizations. In Germany, we have a special one for bringing value to measuring biodiversity, flora and fauna, which I think is extremely important. And we can give it, of course, numbers of money. What actually happens if you don't have them? What will happen in the creativity of landscapes? What can they produce? Up to the point, which is also in Singapore a very important part. Singapore is investing a lot in green infrastructure about tackle climate change to have cooling effect for the city, and even if it's some degrees lower temperature with shade, creates an enormous value for people, and that's why they are starting to invest in this more and more. So these are all points which are, I think I can only say it a little bit, but the value of creating green infrastructure in cities is totally undermined or is ignored. We will probably, next generations will smile and make fun of us that we have not taken that into our calculations much stronger.
Absolutely. So I have my own question that I'd like to ask. Is there an average time frame in which you are approached by either a community or a government, and you begin planning, and you do community outreach, and then you have to do design and funding? How long does it actually take?
Well, Corey, the point is here, as earlier as better. Very often, if we as designers for green areas are coming in too late, we have almost no chance to make a good project. Usually, what I do when I work with clients now, I'm doing a lot of consulting work for cities. I'm consulting actually big cities like Athens, even Istanbul. Beside all the political situations, they are asking for advice. Budapest and Vienna and so on. If you get into a project very early, where it's really about already the question where will be parks, where will be housing, where will be the infrastructure for cars, what are the pipelines you need in the underground. If you come in very early to build a kind of network and an integrated approach with heights, with fresh air, which is going through, if you bring that all into planning instruments, then you are much better off. You're much better. If you get in too late, then you can only repair or do some green decoration, and it's very frustrating. And next point is multidisciplinary approach to bring different disciplines together. So maybe it is possible to bring a good solution for housing, for traffic, for water, for air, and for green spaces and for biodiversity. And if you arrange it in the right way and you bring all these different disciplines together on the round table in the planning process early on, you can create very good projects. To give one example, I was working in Berlin when we had this situation where East and West Berlin were starting to come together. We had this kind of no man's land where the wall was just going through, and I did work on the Pforzheim Platz with Renzo Piano, with Norman Foss, with Richard Rogers and others. We could work very early on discussions about how the cityscape should look like. Where do we have air corridors for fresh air? Where do we bring green structures in? Where do we collect the stormwater? How to create different levels of heights? Where do we bring plazas and recreation areas? If you create that all together and then go into the details, you're much better in a way. So interdisciplinary work and very early on is the best. Of course, sometimes you are called very late, and you have to do with what you can.
Yes, that's well, one question that I've been thinking about is how can we retrofit existing parks that maybe are a bit old-fashioned, where they don't incorporate any natural spaces, and the playground equipment is maybe just some plastic climbing wall with some slides or something like that for children to climb on and slide down. Is there a way to retrofit parks?
Yes, I love that. I really love it, because a lot of the projects lately I was also working on, especially such situations where you have a little bit sort of a rundown, old-fashioned, overcome situations on parks, on green areas, which needed a kind of refreshing or facelifting. And it's actually very interesting because, by the way, just sharing this slide here, this is a park which was actually that, which had a very old-fashioned park design, and we created a completely new park design, and we brought all the new together. It can be done, and there's no limitation. And actually, it's often very interesting to find out what is heritage, what can you bring from the old part, and what can you bring as a new part, and how the language between the old and the new can come together. Of course, playground equipment, which is totally run down and which is all old plastic stuff, probably you have to replace and take it out. But it might be even with totally new concepts that such parks can be surprisingly attractive if you redesign it.
Great, thank you so much. And that is the last question.
Good. All right. Thank you so much. And
Thank you,
yeah, I hope that was clear. We had some technical issues at the beginning, but I hope you had enough. You could understand my German accent.
It was no problem at all. Very clear.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
Good.
Herbert.
Well, thank you so much, Dale, and I wish you and your family and everyone who's actually online that you are staying healthy, that you can create a good balance between all the challenges we have today, and that you fight for a better future for the next generation.
Thank you so much, Herbert.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest
Bye-bye.
of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.